Good morning. My name is Sharon Bergfeld, and I am LBS 1, which means I'm a special education teacher. LBS 2, I went a little step further and got a second teaching license, so I am a certified transition specialist and also a vocational coordinator. And I recently retired from teaching. But I do plan to stay involved, and because I am a big advocate for vocational training for individuals with special needs and disabilities, as well as the transition process, because it can be quite overwhelming and confusing. And I just feel like, I'm ready to move on to something different, but still stay engaged with what my credentials, have, because that's where my passion is. My passion is bringing young adults into the adult world, with vocational skills, and helping them and their families understand the whole transition process. Okay, so just to take a minute, where is everybody from? It's like, who's from Illinois? Anybody from? Okay, we got a group from Illinois. Where are you? Texas. Wow. Don, where are you, Donna? Where do you? Oh, Illinois. Okay. So, it's always exciting to do one of these and find out where everybody is from. So, just to kind of give you a caveat. So, I can really, as far as specifics, I know Illinois because that's where my teaching license is. But the federal laws for special education supersede all of the states. So each state is mandated to have a minimum. That's your federal guidelines, okay? But each state is, they can go in and make things better. They can't make things worse, or do lower than the minimum. So they can choose to do more. So for example, the federal law mandates that transition planning for students with disabilities and receiving special education services must start at 16. However, here in Illinois, we start at 14 and a half. So we can do it earlier. We couldn't go to 17. The federal law won't do that. So each individual state would have their own age at which they would start transition planning. And so I'm not familiar with Nebraska or Texas, but I do know Illinois. So I'm going to try and keep all of this very general because, again, I don't want to mislead you and say, oh, well, this is what happened, and then find out, well, that's in Illinois. I'm from Texas, and they do it different down here, okay? But a good, and I'm sure all of you are very well versed in the special ed, world and the law idea and all of those different acronyms and all of the laws. But I really encourage, and I think I have that on the X site, I really encourage everyone to get familiar with your state's Board of Education website, because there is a wealth of information. And again, it pertains to your state, okay? So things that are true in Illinois may not be true in Nebraska. Maybe they are. But it's a wonderful idea, and it empowers you as a parent if you know the laws and know what your state has set forth as guidelines for students receiving special education services. Okay, and of course I used Illinois State Board logo for a picture. But anyway, I would encourage you to, and like ours is isb.net, I don't know, whatever, just Google Nebraska State Board of Education. But, don't be afraid even to call down to well, for us, it's down to Springfield, but wherever your state board is housed. But don't be afraid to call and make some connections with people there. If you ever have questions or just, to find some clarification on something. Maybe, you're in an IEP meeting and something just doesn't, they're saying something and you're like, I'm not sure that that's totally correct, or I'm not clear on that, okay? Don't be afraid to call your people at your State Board of Education to get clarification, because they really, really want to help and they want to do right by the students that they're serving, especially the ones that are receiving special education services. They want to make sure that those individuals are getting what they need, okay? Okay, so and hey, if you've got something going on in your district, that's awesome. That's awesome too. Call to your state and say, hey, you know what they're doing in XYZ school district? This is amazing. It's always good to hear the good stuff too. Okay? All right, so what is transition? So if you think of it as a bridge between high school and then post-secondary is what we call it. So life after high school, okay? So the transition process involves transition planning, which should be student-centered, and then also then connecting the families and the student to the services that they're going to need, okay? And one thing in my years is kind of a misnomer, is it's like when we start this, the family will kind of envision that we have like this menu of services, and it's like choose 2 from column A and 3 from column B. Really, that's not, if that's what you're getting, that's not really best practice. Your transition planning should be student-centered. It should involve your child. I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word student just because I'm coming from a teacher background. But your child, what are their interests? What are their needs? Obviously, we have to consider that. What are their preferences? And then, let's see, it's SPIN, SP, strengths, your strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. Should involve all 4 of those things, okay? So here it says, a truly successful transition process is the result. Comprehensive team planning, so it should involve the parent, the student, which they are number 1 and number 2. The student is really number 1 because this is all about them. This is their life. But the parent knows the student better than anyone else. Plus, you're going to spend the rest of your life, engaging with your child, where the school, eventually we're no longer a part of it. And while we can be a support, so really, when you think about it, prioritizing students number 1, we should use this finger, 1, and then the parent kind of comes in after that just because they're going to be the biggest supporter, okay? Driven by the dreams, desires, and abilities of the child. Transition plan provides basic structure for preparing an individual to live, work, and play in the community as fully and independently as possible. Okay, so again, being student-centered, because what are their dreams, what are their desires, but what are their limitations? Where do we feel there's a limitation, but can we push it a little bit and see if maybe the one thing about transition planning that I have found is oftentimes these are situations, especially vocational. The student or the child has never been asked necessarily to be in the community in a work environment. So we can't really say, well, they're not going to be able to do this, or we really feel they're going to be able to. We put them in that situation, and then we see. We have to trust. But we kind of see, and we see, well, because sometimes I have found that, even myself, I'll be like, I'm not sure. But that child has the motivation to complete whatever the task is or do whatever it is that they're asked. And somehow that, compensates for anything that you are like, this is what they were doing in the classroom, so I'm not sure that they're going to buy into this. But it's a different environment. They look at it as it's more adult-like to get a job. They're being more like their peers who have jobs. And so somehow, through the magic of, psyche and whatever, they shine, and once, that's really kind of the purpose, is to get them to shine. Find out where they shine. Where do they do their best work? Where do they succeed? Okay? Does anybody have any questions so far? If I'm going too fast, or there's anything you don't understand? Okay. Don't be afraid. Interrupt me if you have to. Okay. So the transition plan of the IEP, so it's a developed according, we all know IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it's got to address transition service requirements. And now this is federal, beginning at age 16. Again, check with your state, or maybe you already know, depending on how old your child is, okay? But it must include, so age-appropriate, measurable post-secondary goals that are based on age-appropriate transition assessment and related trainings, employment, and independent living skills. So those are the 3 areas that are really focused on in transition, is education and or training, Can be on the job, can be community college, can be four-year university, whatever. Could be a trade union, you know, the apprenticeships. Should be age-appropriate assessments in order to gauge whatever skill or interest area, as well as getting some experience in the community, putting them into those situations so we can take data to see where do they really do well, where do they maybe have difficulty, and is that difficulty something that can be accommodated, so we can put an accommodation in place to help them, you know, get better or overcome whatever the challenge is presented, or is it really something that just is not, you know, maybe the level of understanding isn't there, or maybe there's a physical limitation. But it's really work-based learning, which is something that I did a lot with the district that I was in. It was really very much a data collection process. I mean, it was great for the students to get out in the community, get into those environments. They feel so much more important, because you think about it, our vocation or our job is part of our identity, you know? So, because oftentimes you meet someone new, one of the first questions is, well, what do you do for a living? You know, so even to say, you know, whatever it is, I work at Meijer. I take care of the parking lot. And there's a sense of pride. There's a sense of ownership. There's a sense that I'm doing exactly what my peers or my friends or my brother or sister, my mom and dad do. They have a job. I have a job. You know what I mean? It just is, it's such a neat, almost transformation that I've seen with some students, that when they land that first job. I had a young man that he was very, very shy. But even if I talked to him about getting a job, you could just watch him withdraw. He just reminded me of like a turtle, you know, going into his shell. He just did, you know, it was just such a something he didn't want to think about. Okay. Well, I worked with him and I facilitated and I built a relationship with a business in the community, and he was hired. And I had teachers reaching out to me and saying, oh my gosh, the difference. He's talking about, I have a job. This is what I do. He's walking taller. He's got his chest out. You know, it was just like amazing, amazing. And then I would, of course, as part of our vocational program, I would stay in contact with the person who had employed him. It was a restaurant. And I would go in and I would talk to the manager, and they would say, you know what? I know when I look at the schedule and that young man is on the schedule, I know I don't have to worry about that part of the restaurant because he's got it. So it was just like this whole level of confidence. And it was just amazing. And I felt so lucky to be a part of that, because it was really, really cool to watch. Okay, so yeah, so sometimes as far as like the age appropriate assessments, sometimes that means putting the child into a job or and maybe it's not a paid job. A volunteer job is fine too. You know, that's the work-based learning. But that's a data collection opportunity, okay? So were they able to complete the task independently to the expectation? Where were maybe the hiccups that we need to maybe come up with an accommodation? Or is this really something like, if there's lack of desire or motivation, like if this is just totally like, I don't want to do this, then, okay, we mark that down. Okay, that's a non-preferred, let's try something else, okay? Because when you hit on what they're really interested in doing, it's just like they're a whole different individual, okay? And then the transition services is the second part, which includes their course of study, as well as any kind of related services or, speech or anything, related that they're going to need once they graduate and are kind of out in the world. The course of study, at least like I said, in Illinois, our IEPs are monitored by the State Board of Ed. They have, they audit them and stuff. And what they want to see is if somewhere in that transition plan, that student has said, I want to work in an auto shop, okay? That they look at the course of study and they see, okay, this student took electrical services, they took engines, they took, this and this. They didn't take culinary, they want to connect the dots. And I would assume all all of your state boards are the same way. So, so even to the course of study, you know, and that's something that you can make sure when your child is getting signed up for whatever classes they're going to take, make sure that that aligns with what their ultimate goal is. And granted, some of these, you know, the electives are for kind of experimentation, you know. Oh, maybe I'd like to be a chef, or maybe I'd like to work for a caterer or something like that. So I'm going to take this culinary class. But as they as they progress through high school, they should be honing down what it is that really, or you should be noticing that they seem to be drawn to this particular occupation, or involving this type, you know, they're really good with using their hands. They really like to help people. You know, it should be kind of starting to get a little bit narrowed down, okay? But all of that is something that needs to be present in their transition plan of their IEP. Okay. Transition services. So they are coordinated educational activities and supports that will help the student with disabilities reach their measurable post-secondary goals. Okay? So upon graduation, Joey will attend, you know, Waubonsee Community College. Okay? And then how are we going to make that happen? What supports are going to be needed? Okay? Are they going to, well, they will need to be in touch with the Office of Disability Services. Every college kind of has their own special name for them, but our local community college theirs is the Access Center for Disability Resources. Okay? They should be in touch with that. Well, who can we reach out to in that, you know, vein? Who at that college can we reach out to? Maybe they're going to need some speech therapy after they, you know, and that'll certainly be in line with going to community college. They need to be able to communicate effectively and feel comfortable. So is there an outside speech therapy agent or person that they can, you know, connect with, okay? So these coordinated services that will help them achieve as they get out into the world, okay? They're based on the individual needs, obviously, right? One size does not fit all. And it also takes, again, into account their strengths, their preferences, their interests, and of course, I already said their needs. This can include instruction, related service, adult living, things like cooking, maintaining their living space if they're going to live independently at all, or even if they're in like a group home or something. Can they keep their room clean? Can they, you know, can they cook? Can they shop? Do they know these things? And of course, again, it's all based on, you know, the individual and where their interests and abilities lie. Is there some kind of counseling that they either participate in at the high school level or that they can foresee that they're going to need? So some of this is kind of a wraparound of what they're getting in high school, but then maybe a little bit can also be, what do you anticipate? What do you feel might become a challenge? Because leaving high school, leaving the school system that has been very much a part of their world for 12 plus years can be very scary, you know, for parents too. Obviously, vocational support. If you have a child that's going to be able to hold a job, is there going to be some kind of support? Will they need maybe job coaching to get them over the hump of that first few weeks of in a job until they are independent enough to be able to be successful in that job, okay? So these services are intended to facilitate, excuse me, a smooth transition from school to adult life or post-secondary activities, okay? So it can be education, it can be integrated employment in the community, any kind of adult service, independent living, community participation, okay? Excuse me. Anybody have any questions so far? How many of you have transition age? So transition age is typically those students that have finished their high school career, they've earned their credits to get their high school diploma, but they're not quite ready to face the world yet. So in our district, it was like 18 to 22, kind of in that age. Are anybody in that age, or are you all pre?
We're sort of there. 18, but we're still a she's gonna be a senior now.
Okay.
We're not 100%
All right.
there.
Okay.
But we're starting, the whole transition has started a while ago.
Right.
But this is really kind of where it's kicking in.
Yes.
Versus the last year.
Yes, yes, right. And you will have some variations with the age, you know, with, like I said, 18 to 22, but we do have some 18, even 19-year-olds that are seniors in high school, just for whatever reason, maybe they were retained or.
She's a September child.
Yeah, yeah, they got to meet that, or maybe there was something earlier where they were retained for a grade or whatever, but it's kind of that, you know, young adult time frame, okay? All right. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so I kind of stated this a little bit. So the 3 areas that we kind of focus on in the transition plan, and again, your plan should be purposeful and meaningful for your student, okay? This isn't what mom wants them to do. This isn't what dad wants them to do. This is what they want to do. And then we try to create a plan, again, considering their dreams, considering their strengths, considering where they might need some support. But again, you know, if you, how would you feel if you had your whole life planned out for you and it was not anything you wanted? You know, it would be very, you wouldn't be very happy. So, education and training, again, that can be community college, university, it can be on-the-job training, it can be an apprenticeship, it could be, you know, I like to think of post-secondary education as any environment where learning is happening, formal or informal. So that could be a community college in a classroom, college classes, university. It could also be maybe the gentleman, your child is interested in autos, and there's a gentleman in your town that has his own auto shop that takes your child under their wing and starts, you know, working with them under the hood of the car. There's post-secondary learning happening there. They're no longer in high school, they're learning a skill, okay? That's the way I like to think of post-secondary education. Employment, that can look like a lot of different things, and then independent living. So we're going to take a quick look at kind of each one. All right. So there's a lot of opportunities and programs that are available, you know, for students that are exiting high school or, you know, or aging out of a transition program. Again, community college, university, internships, mentorships, whatever. Many are, you know, formal or informal, and there are connections between education. So there's that post-secondary learning, as well as vocational rehabilitation. They're learning a skill, they're learning a trade, they're learning, you know, to do a job. Employment training, social services, health services, you know, all of these things are taken into account. So you have an example like a career vocational center, community college, there's state technical schools, there's trade schools and apprenticeships. All, you know, and there's more. That's not an exhaustive list. Sometimes you have to be real creative, but hey, if it gets to the goal, go for it, okay? And this is just kind of a side note because I wanted to include this, a summary of performance. So as your, so we have, so I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
My name's Bernadette.
Okay. Okay, so is anybody, so I'm assuming then everyone else's child is younger than Isabella? Okay. Okay, so summary performance. So you're going to get this sooner than everybody else, but what the summary of performance, it's a part of the IEP, and maybe you're already familiar, but if not, so it is a required part of their graduation or when they age out. Okay, so if they go on to a transition program, if your local district, and so does everybody understand what I mean by a transition program? That's no? Okay. Our district has what they call pathways. It's for the 18 to 22 years, or, you know, if they're, like Isabella's an 18-year-old senior, so she may, you know, if she was in Oswego, she could, you know, go there next year. It's that bridge I'm talking about. It's not earning credits. It's not academics. They're not reading Romeo and Juliet. They're not learning about the War of 1812 or anything. They are learning life skills. Functional reading, functional math, learning to cook, learning They do have vocational, they do have vocational as part of their programming where they go out into the community. So it's more life-based. It's kind of mirroring what their life would look like after community involvement. They, like our transition program, we have an adaptive PE teacher that takes them to different, like they go bowling, they go to a fitness center at the hospital has, like this fitness center, and he takes them there. They do a lot of different, to get them involved in the community, okay? And also be active, you know, as an adult, okay? So the summary of performance, though, provides crucial information to help the student reach their goals, or I should say child, I'm sorry. But it includes information about their academic experiences and achievements, you know, their functional performance, as well as recommendations about how to assist the child from their IEP team. So these are the teachers, the therapists, all these people that have been involved in the child's academic career up until this point. What's worked? What have you found that works with Isabella or, you know, Billy or Joey or whatever? Because again, it is not one size fits all, as we all know, okay? So this summary of performance or achievement can be used at the college level for getting accommodations in the classroom. It could be used potentially, I mean, you can use this for a lot of things, but anywhere where you might need to show, okay, this is what worked for my child. This is what didn't work, okay? This is where they really succeeded. And a part of the summary of performance is information from the teachers, as well as there's input from the student, which is nice, okay? But it's really important if they are planning to go on to post-secondary education, community college or a university, to have this, because this is going to be very beneficial in having them being granted accommodations that they might need. Things like a note taker, extended time for testing, okay? So things like that. But it's possible that you could use it in an employment situation as well, depending, again, individualization, depending on the young person and whatever industry or job that they're looking at, okay? So what does the summary of performance contain? Things about their life goals, okay? So your student, as a senior, Isabel, will probably take a few transition surveys. What does she want to do? What does she see as her future? You know, what does she like? What's she interested? What does she prefer? And then kind of where the teacher comes in is some of the functional and academic strengths and needs. You know, and Isabella can also, well, this is where I feel like I'm strong, but then the teacher also can say, well, this is what we saw in the classroom or whatever. This is where we saw her succeed. The accommodations, what worked? What didn't? And just as a side note too, be familiar, which I'm sure you all are, with your students' accommodations, and don't be afraid if you see that student reaches a point, or your child reaches a point where they may not need that accommodation anymore. Don't be afraid to ask for that to be removed from their IEP. I have interviewed students or worked with students, and I'll ask them about their accommodations, and some of them don't even know. So it's important that your student or your child knows what their accommodations are, because those are the things that, this is what works for me in getting, you know, what grades I want in school, or this is, you know, what helps me to do whatever it is I'm asked to do. But I've interviewed high school age students, and I'd say, well, let's look at your accommodations. Many of them, I'm surprised, haven't even read their IEP. But then I'll say, let's look at your accommodations. And I'll say, you know, well, what about that? I don't need that anymore. Well, then let's bring that up at your next meeting. Because if you don't need it, there's no sense in it being there, you know. But be kind of aware, and don't be afraid to say, hey, you know what, I'm not sure. Or where is the evidence that Joey still needs XYZ, okay? Because sometimes, you know, we just get in the habit of just, well, he needed it then, he's still going to need it now. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the accommodations stay, and legitimately they stay. Sometimes they don't. They just don't. They grow or whatever, you know, where it was just a struggle they had for a couple years, okay? And then also, what are the strategies for success? Or again, what worked? Okay? Also, again, what worked from the student's perspective, what worked from the teacher or social worker or whoever, the therapist or whoever, us related services your child is receiving. What did they see worked for, motivating or academically, okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions so far, like the summary of performance? Okay. All right. It's really important that your student understands their rights and responsibilities at the post-secondary education level because things do change, okay? K through 12, or K through, if they're in a transition program, so K through 22 is what we call an entitlement. That young person has an IEP team, they have a case manager, they have a social worker. All of these things are provided by the school district. And they are entitled to every single one of those services because it's been identified that they have a need. Once they leave the educational system, it's not that they're not entitled to some things. I don't want to make it sound like everything goes away. But because they are now an adult and we have things like privacy, HIPAA, FERPA, all of those things, they need to be eligible. So there might be an application process, or they might have to initiate the service, okay, and say, look, I need this. Here's my documentation that shows that I need this, okay? So, and that's what I have found is a kind of a misnomer. People assume that IEP just travels with them to the next level, and it really doesn't. IDEA and those things, those laws that covered them in the public school system, K through 12, don't go on. There are other things. There's like the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is still the Rehabilitation Act of 1974. I mean, there still are laws that protect them. It just looks different because now they're an adult. So they go to a community college. They need to let I'm calling it the Access Center because that's what I'm familiar with, but that disabilities office. They need to make that initial contact with them and say, hey, I'm a student that's going to come here in the fall. These are my, challenges. These are the accommodations I'm looking for. Because like a high school will not, contact that, community college and say, okay, here's a list of the students from our special education department or kids that are receiving special ed services that are coming to your college in the fall. That doesn't happen, okay? So again, that's that shift from entitlement. They've been identified, they've had the evaluation, now they have this team, and all of this stuff is provided by the district. Now they're in the adult world where it becomes more about, I need this, so I'm coming to you to help me get what I need, okay? That comes in, and we're going to talk a little bit at the very end about self-advocacy, because that's another skill that is very, very important. Okay, again, there's a shift from entitlement to eligibility at the post-secondary level, like Section 504, prohibits discrimination. From, like the community college can't say, oh, no, you can't come here because you're in a wheelchair or you have, this condition or that. They can't do that. That's illegal, okay? And the ADA, of course, ensures that there's accessibility to buildings and all that kind of stuff. So there are still laws, but IDEA does not cover college, okay? Colleges are also not required to make modifications. Make sure you're clear on the difference between a modification and an accommodation. An accommodation is something that is put into place so that your child can access the material. So, a note taker, maybe they need a reader. They need extended time with testing. They need a different environment. They need someplace quiet, like a testing center or something. Okay, that allows your student access to the materials. A modification is exactly what it sounds like. It's modifying the curriculum. Colleges really can't do that. Everyone needs to have the same curriculum, and because they can't. So things like if there's a multiple choice test and all the other students have a field of 4 to choose from, but your child's modification in their IEP says theirs is reduced, a college isn't going to be able to do that, okay? They need to be able to have everybody gets the same stuff, but they can accommodate for the access to it, okay? Now, every college is different, so I would also be in contact. If it's a community college or a university, I would get in contact and say, give me an idea of what, accommodations you typically grant. I have heard of people that have successfully been able to, get some, they're kind of borderline modifications and things, but every place is different. But this is kind of in general with different managers of disability offices. They say, yeah, we can do, extended time, things like for testing and things like that, but we can't change the curriculum, which is what a modification is, in order to, have assist with that student, okay? Again, it's the student's responsibility to inform the college of their disability, and that summary of performance is really going to be a crucial document to help them understand what were the things that your student needed, and then they can line it up with their accommodations that they're able to grant and say, okay, well, we can, yeah, sure, note taker, no problem. Maybe they need, assisted, extended time, I'm sorry. So it just depends on the college, okay? But don't be afraid, it's just an ask. Just ask, because maybe there's some way that they can, or they might be able to come up with a different accommodation that kind of fits there without, doing anything that's going to jeopardize their credibility. Okay. All right, let's look at employment. Community-based work experience. So whether or not your student at 16 is when everybody gets to work. Maybe there's some differences within the state, or with a younger with a work permit. But regardless of whether they're going to go into a job, whether they're going to do job training, they're going to do post-secondary education, it's important for students that are receiving special education services or with a disability to gain work experience during their high school years, okay? There's research that shows students that have work experiences before they exit high school are employed more often than those that are their first experience is, hey, here I am, I'm 18 or I'm 16 or whatever. So like a class that I taught, it was called Cooperative Vocational Education, CVE for short. So I taught like what it meant to be employed. Okay, what are the responsibilities? It's like complementary to if you have career and tech ed classes, autos, culinary, business, all of those kind of that are a gen ed class. So this was kind of complementary to that. So I taught things like what we call it now the essential skills. It used to be called the soft skills, professionalism, ethics, all of those kind of things. Be on time, dress professionally, all that kind of stuff. But then part of this class too was 2 days a week. I made arrangements with some local businesses where I split my class into groups of about 3 students, and they would go to the popcorn store. And 2 days a week, it was an unpaid experience, but they learned what it meant to work in the popcorn store. We had students that went to the Meijer, which is a big grocery store chain. They learned to stock shelves, they learned to face shelves, they learned, to greet, things like that. We had a lot of, we had 7 or 10, and every year was to be a little bit different because Oswego was really building, so we were getting a lot of new businesses. But we tried to give, during the school year, 4 rotations. So these rotations were set up for about 7 weeks. So twice a week for 7 weeks, the student would either be in the community or they'd be in the classroom, and I had a job coach. She's a paraprofessional that was trained, so she would go out into the community with the students and supervise them on the job, and then I'd be back at the school teaching the stuff in the classroom. We did have students that at the end of their rotation applied for a job at Old Navy was one that We had students that applied for jobs and were hired. They were already trained. They just spent 7 weeks learning all this stuff. So it was a win-win, okay? But regardless of whether they ended up with a job at the end or not, they got that experience. They knew, how to answer to somebody other than their teacher or their principal or their dean or whoever, right? Now we've got somebody in the community. They learn to work with people, they're not their peers, right? In the school, most everybody's their peers. But in a job, you might have somebody 10 years older, you won't really get anybody younger, but you know what I mean? All different, enough from all different backgrounds. It's just a whole different experience. You think about, what you learned when you went out on your first job, how it wasn't, like school. It was very different. Lots of different people, lots of different responsibilities, interacting with the public for some of our students that had, difficulty with interacting socially. This gave them an opportunity, with a job coach around, so they did have someone familiar. But again, they're learning all of those things that they're going to need to transfer out when they leave high school, okay? So what is the value of a work experience? Because I have had parents that say, well, they're doing it, they should be paid. Well, yeah, okay, but they're not ready yet. Maybe they need a little more help with this or that or whatever. And I said, this is what this is about, is we're getting experience, okay? It helps the students acquire jobs at a higher rate after graduation. They learn to work in an integrated setting and to answer to other people, a supervisor or a manager. They kind of learn that hierarchy of, business. Just the simple things of, again, interacting socially, understanding like customer service, things like that. There's just so many little lessons that you can't duplicate in a classroom. You can't do that in the classroom. It needs to be in an authentic work environment, okay? Again, they're more likely to be competitively employed than their peers who have not ever gone through work-based learning, okay? Again, community-based work experiences such as internships and apprenticeships, they're the opportunities for the student to learn firsthand what it means to be an employed person. They are also learning skills that they can put on their resume, right? So they go to Old Navy and they have to use one of those inventory scanner deals, gun I call it, but they can put that on their resume. I did this volunteer experience at Old Navy. These are the things I learned. Okay, so maybe they really want to work in a retail industry. Well, there's a skill that they shouldn't have to learn other than maybe a little nuance of a different, Kohl's maybe works a little different than Old Navy. But, basically it's the same. Okay, but these are things that they can put on their resume. Okay, and even though they're not paid, they are learning everything that they need to know about being employed. They're just not getting that paycheck, but they're gaining experience, okay? All right, so there are some supports for employment. A lot of them are your vocational rehabilitation, so your human services, Division of Human Services, and then under them is the Division of Rehabilitation, Vocational Rehabilitation. I also worked with a counselor in my job from DRS. And so these students would work with me while they're in high school, but then they were automatically linked to the adult service. So then they just transitioned to her services after they graduated, okay? So they assist, so your vocational rehabilitation, they assist individuals with disabilities to acquire knowledge and skills necessary to achieve employment, which obviously has economic impacts positively. All right, so these vocational rehabilitation agencies, they encourage the value of early engagement with students and youth with disabilities to start preparing. That was kind of what I was doing in the high school, okay? But even if your school does not have like CVE, like what I taught, volunteering, you can start volunteering, 10, 12, right? Food pantries are always looking for volunteers. The local animal shelter, maybe your child really likes animals. The local animal shelter is always looking for somebody to pick up dog poop, clean the cages, feed them, you know, I mean, anything. Some of your community, like the park district, some of the organizations, I had a young man who did volunteer work with the Optimist Club in the town. You know, there's always opportunities for volunteering. You can put that on a resume. It makes them look more well-rounded because they're giving back to their community. They're gaining work experience, but for the person reading that resume, they're like, oh, look at it. They were involved with the Optimist Club. Cool, they're giving back to their community, okay? Or they worked with an animal shelter or something like that, okay? But yeah, starting early, you know, and it's awesome if it can be done like as a family in a way, like a parent does it too, even to just get them started. You know, maybe, you know, you reach out to your local food pantry and they say, sure. So you as mom or dad go with, and eventually you're like, you know what, I think, let's see how they do on their own. You're going to collect some data there. You're going to be your own data collection. So Saturday morning comes and you say, you know what, you're going to try this, or I'm going to come in with you, but then I have to run an errand. So then you leave them. And then find out from, you know, and of course you can set this up with whoever the manager is or whatever in advance, but find out after you left, what did they do? Did they continue to work or did they spend their time looking for you? Okay, so that's going to be some data to find out where do we need to work on some things, okay? You'll probably be surprised at how much they'll be just like, yeah, see ya, okay, because this is my job, you know? But I encourage, you know, because I'll get families to say, yeah, but they can't work till they're 16, but they can volunteer, you know, they really can. And there's, you know, places are usually hard pressed for volunteers, and they're still gaining all of those skills that they're going to need that are related to having a real job, okay? And again, in my experience, the students that I had the easiest time placing into jobs were those that had volunteerism in their background. I had a young man who, he wanted to work at Jimmy John's. And so I met with the manager and I said, here, you know, okay, we set up an interview. They needed somebody to just like do the dining room, and he would stock the potato chips and the cookies and things like that to start. Now I understand he makes the tuna fish and all that stuff. But, so we set up an interview because I always had my students go through the authentic process. You don't just get a job handed to you, even though there was some background work done, you know. They went through the interview process. They printed up, they had a resume. They had to sit and interview, right? So the general manager is looking at this young man's resume and he says, you've done 2.5 years of volunteerism at the food pantry. And he said, yeah. So we lined up a 30-day train to pay. He's going to come in and he's going to show you in 30 days working time that he can do this job. About a week into which he said, we don't need any more proof. He's hired because he had the work ethic. He knew what was expected of him and he did it, okay? So, you know, don't discount volunteering because there is so much to be learned. And again, it's something you can put on a resume and people do look at that. They do look at that. And it shows community involvement. All right, independent living. So, what does that mean in our transition plan? Well, a lot of the teachers I worked with kind of got stuck on, well, they're not going to live independently. They're always, you know, they're going to need to be in a group home or something like that. And I'd say, but look beyond that, you know, literal independent living. It can mean any skill they're going to need as an adult. Getting a driver's license, managing their medications if they're on any prescription ones. Financial literacy. Do they know how to budget? Do they know how to save? Do they know how to be a savvy shopper when they go out grocery shopping? Can they maintain their living space in an acceptable manner? What about using public transportation? How are they going to get to that job? Is it in their wheelhouse to get a driver's license? If not, how about public transportation? What's available in your area? Can they use it? You know, do they know how to read the schedule? Do they know how to set up a pickup time or where to go to the bus stop or whatever? Meal planning and meal preparation. and I don't remember what, I can't see what I had written down there. But anyway, it's not just living independently, okay? Just think about what you do. And this is what I tell or ask my students when I would do a transition interview. I'd say, think about your parents. Think about all the things that they have to do as an adult. What thing do you think might be something you're going to need help with? Financial literacy came up a lot. I don't know how to budget my money. But for some of them, they had never thought about. They'd never called. So here I have a 17 or 18-year-old in front of me who's never called and made a doctor's appointment, who's never ordered pizza, who's never mailed something, you know. And these are, and I know it's easy to, you know, you just do it. You just do it. But, you know, at some point you have to stop and think, would they be able to do this on their own? And then start working and ask them. You can, I mean, just because I'm a certified transition specialist, you guys can do transition interviews with your own. What do you think? You know, what kind? You see me paying bills and taking the car to get the oil changed and all this kind of stuff. What do you think you're going to need help with? And then, you know, figure out. And if you need help, contact your special ed team. If it's something that you're like, I'm not sure how to approach this, but this is what they express. It's also giving your IEP team some information about your student too, or your child, okay? So, you know, be super involved. Again, because we as educators are eventually going to leave the picture, right? But you guys aren't. You know, that your child is your child for the rest of their life. So, all right, so supports, there are supports for independent living. In Illinois, and I think this might be true in other states, but I don't want to assume that. Every county in the state of Illinois has what they call a Center for Independent Living. These are staffed oftentimes by people who have a disability themselves, so it's kind of a I can put myself in your shoes type of a thing. Their mission is to support young adults and adults with disabilities develop those living skills that they need to be as independent as possible. So we have things like teaching them how to shop. They can't really do, well, they could do like studying for rules of the road or something like that, but I mean, they can't really, you know, take them out to drive. But they can, I know our particular CIL, which is what we call it, CIL, Center for Independent Living, they had a social group for young adults with autism to work on their social skills. They had a book club that the kids would get together, and that's kind of how they practiced their social skills, was working on, you know, talking about this book. Their services are all free, not a cost to the family or the student. So, and examples are they can connect you with local services. Often they'll know some, you know, maybe another agency or something that might benefit you. They can do travel training. They often have a lot of information about housing options in the area. Okay, so if you're looking for your young adult to maybe move in with some roommates or something, you know, they often have options for that. Developing those social skills and just helping in what are you going to need to do as an adult, okay? So your Centers for Independent Living, I think, at least in my experience, have been kind of an underutilized agency that have a tremendous amount of resources and help, and again, it's all free. And like I said, very often these individuals that work there either have a disability or they might be somebody like maybe a former special ed teacher or somebody that has a connection to the disability community where they have an understanding and they understand, you know, kind of what the needs are and things. Okay, and then final thought, and it's oh so important, and if you've been listening to me earlier, you'll know what I'm going to say. Self-determination, self-advocacy. Everybody understand what that means? Okay, so I'm going to tell you again. Person-centered planning, keeping the child at the center of the process, okay? Yes, mom wants you to do this, but what do you want to do? Okay, I love you, Mom, but, you know, and I was actually in an IEP meeting where a young person became brave, and she was, and she finally said to mom, she was a senior, she's like, that's not what I want. I want, you want me to do this, but I love you, but I'm not really interested in that. And it took so much, but we had worked for her to get to that point. But it was, and mom was kind of, but it was a good thing, So, listen to them and keep them in the center. Take into account their strengths, their preferences, interests, and needs. What is hard for you? What was hard for you at school today? What was hard for you at your job today? And then is it just that it was a awkward social situation, or is there something that maybe an accommodation needs to be put into place? Okay? So encourage your child to express their vision for their future and include them. Have them take a leadership role if at all possible, because this is very important. This is their life, again. Provide them with opportunities to make informed decisions, develop or improve their problem-solving skills. Okay, so you get to the bus stop and, for some reason the bus was here a little early. What are you going to do now? Okay, so those problem-solving skills. Okay, self-advocacy is being the loudest voice in your life. And in order to get your needs met. Okay, because if you don't say something, and I know and especially if we have students on the autism spectrum, it's like they know it in their mind, so they assume you know it. I mean, surely you know because you can read my mind. And so, but helping them to express what is it you need, what is going to help you, in your job or in whatever that challenging situation is, and asking for help. Some students have a terrible time asking for help. And I don't know really why, but maybe it's just, I don't know. I feel maybe they haven't established a trust relationship yet with that teacher or whoever, but being able to ask for help, okay? And then let them make mistakes. This is something that I saw a lot, is we as parents and I as a teacher, I don't want this kid to fail. I want them to do so good. But we have to let them fail sometimes and have those natural consequences. Now, granted, if it's going to endanger them, that's thrown out the window. But if you can even see, I know this is not going to go well. I know they're going to make a mistake. Let them do it. Because I'll bet if you thought back to some of the lessons you learned when you were growing up, they were probably ones where you made a mistake and you were very embarrassed, right? Or you hurt someone's feelings. Those are the lessons that stick. And chances are good that if they have to suffer the natural consequences, they're going to remember that next time, okay? And because we as parents can't always be there to protect or make that decision for them, but we're going to encourage decision-making processes and things. So, again, it's all about what are they going to need to be able to function as a productive member of their community and as an adult. Okay? Oh, okay.